There are two ways of ruling a nation: democratically or autocratically. In democratic societies, people vote to elect representatives, and if they end up not liking those representatives, they vote them out. But in autocratic societies, one person or a small group of elite individuals have the power to do as they please without people's approval. One interesting observation is that all of the nations ending in "stan" are considered autocracies. But why? Central and South Asia are home to a group of nations which end in "stan." Stan is a Persian suffix meaning land of. There are 7 stan nations, all of which are located in Central and South Asia: Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Physically, only one of them is coastal: Pakistan, having a 500-mile coastline with the Arabian Sea. While Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan have a coastline with the Caspian Sea, that water body is completely landlocked. So, this makes them landlocked as well, along with its other stan neighbors. And Uzbekistan is one of the only 2 double landlocked nations in the world, along with tiny Liechtenstein in Europe. When you look at the stan nations, you're looking at a region with some seriously deep and tangled history. These places were once part of ancient empires like Persia, and later saw waves of conquerors like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan roll through. During the Silk Road era, cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were major cultural and trade centers. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and most of the Central Asian stans got pulled into the Russian Empire and eventually the Soviet Union, only gaining independence after its collapse in 1991. Pakistan's story is different, as it was once part of British India and became its own country in 1947. And then there's Afghanistan, which technically stayed independent but ended up caught in a constant tug-of-war between outside powers and internal struggles. Today, each of these countries is still carving out its identity, shaped by a mix of Persian, Turkic, Russian, and colonial influences, all while dealing with their own modern challenges. One of these modern challenges is their political systems, as all of the stan nations are classified as autocracies, although at differing levels. There are several reasons, both physical and human ones, that have made the stan nations the way they are today. Much of Central Asia is in a rugged part of the world. This ruggedness, plus being landlocked, has had some direct and indirect reasons why autocratic governments thrive there. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are ranked as the 2nd and 3rd most mountainous nations in the world, with 91.9% and 90.7% of their land covered by mountains. Generally, it's difficult to build infrastructure, connect regions, or even unify a country under a strong identity with those physical limitations. On the other hand, much of the nations of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan are landlocked and dominated by deserts and steppes, plateaued expanses of dry land. This also makes conditions unfavorable for connecting communities and thus people. To the south, both Afghanistan and Pakistan also are home to rugged areas, especially in their interiors, where the western parts of the Himalayas as well as the Hindu Kush Mountains are located. Due to this, infrastructure is limited, and the people who live there are connected to strong regional identities and local autonomy. A physical and geopolitical factor that has influenced the stan nations is that they're surrounded by regional powers. To the east is China, to the north is Russia, to the west is Iran, and to the south is India. All these powers except India are autocracies, and do influence the geopolitics of the stan nations directly and indirectly. Russia's Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping are diplomatic with these Central Asian nations, and don't interfere in their governmental policies, further strengthening authoritarian regimes within. All the stan nations except for Pakistan and Afghanistan were part of the Soviet Union until 1991, and while Afghanistan was independent, it was heavily influenced by it, especially from the 1970s to the early 1990s when the nation had a Soviet-aligned communist regime. When the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991, the six Stan nations suddenly gained independence, but had weak democratic institutions. Many of their first leaders were former Soviet officials who maintained authoritarian-style rule with centralized power structures, little political competition, and tightly controlled media. Another human geographical factor that has been a role in creating autocracies within the Stan nations is religion. In all of the Stan nations, Islam is the predominant religion. In Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan, Islam plays a very important role in many people's lives. But these nations are secular, and Sharia law is not implemented. In other ways, however, religion is tightly controlled. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan closely regulate mosque, Friday sermons, and Islamic education, and independent or politically active religious movements are banned. In Tajikistan, veil bans, beard restrictions, and monitoring of madrasas are common. There, the government fears parties such as the banned Islamic Renaissance Party, one labeled now as a terrorist organization, may try to create an Islamist fundamentalist government. Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are a bit more relaxed with regulating religion, but still keep a close eye on religious organizations, especially foreign-funded or radical groups. On the contrary, both Pakistan and Afghanistan do implement Sharia law into their governmental systems. Pakistan is officially an Islamic republic, and its laws are a blend of British common law and Islamic principles. Sharia influences the legal system, but it's not the only source of law. Much of Pakistan's Sharia law is in areas like family law, inheritance, and blasphemy. The Federal Sharia Court reviews laws to ensure they align with Islamic teachings, and Islamic punishments exist for certain crimes, though they are rarely enforced to their fullest extent. In Afghanistan, since the Taliban regained control in 2021, they have enforced a strict interpretation of Islamic law, affecting nearly all aspects of life. This includes mandatory dress codes for women, gender segregation, bans on female education beyond 6th grade, and harsh punishments for crimes like theft or adultery, including public floggings and executions. The justice system under the Taliban relies heavily on clerics rather than formal courts, and there is little due process. So, how does each of the Stan nations compare to each other autocratically? There are some pronounced differences. The Democracy Index, published by the Economist Group, a British media outlet, is an index measuring the quality of democracy by nation. It is numerically based out of 10. A ranking of 8 to 10 represents a full democracy, 6 to 8 a full democracy, 4 to 6 a hybrid regime, and below 4 authoritarian. Keep in mind that there is some criticism to this index, but out of the many used, it is the most straightforward and thorough. Out of the 7 Stan nations, Kyrgyzstan, a nation of 7.1 million with mostly Turkic peoples, ranks the highest on the index, scoring 3.52. The nation does have competitive elections and a more open political environment than its neighbors. Kyrgyzstan has seen multiple changes in leadership through public protest and elections, including peaceful transfers of power. However, despite these democratic strides, the country still struggles with autocratic tendencies. Recent years have seen increasing political repression, the arrest of opposition figures and activists, and restrictions on media and NGOs. And in the last decade, Kyrgyzstan has democratically backslid from a hybrid regime to an autocratic one. The largest physically sized Stan nation, Kazakhstan, has a democracy index of 3.08. The large Central Asian nation is a hotbed for natural resources, particularly oil and natural gas, as well as minerals like uranium, iron ore, and gold. Because of this commodity wealth, Kazakhstan is the richest Stan nation, with a GDP of $693 billion and a per capita income of around $35,000 a year. Kazakhstan presents itself as a stable and modernizing nation, but its political system remains heavily autocratic despite some superficial reforms. While it has held regular elections and made gestures towards liberalization, power has long been concentrated in the hands of a dominant ruling party, and a strong presidency. The country has seen some leadership changes, including the resignation of longtime ruler Nursultan Nazarbayev in 2019. But real political opposition is still limited, and dissent is often suppressed. Media freedom is restricted, protests are tightly controlled, and civil society faces pressure. Overall, Kazakhstan is far from what a democracy should be. Pakistan, a nation of 241 million people and the 5th largest in the world, ranks 2.84 on the Democracy Index. Pakistan is an interesting geopolitical region, as the area is ruled by various empires for thousands of years, with the most recent one being the British Raj from 1858 to 1947. In 1947, Pakistan, along with India, was given independence and is split into West and East Pakistan. During the 1950s and the 1960s, there was a lot of geopolitical instability in Pakistan, including democratic setbacks, and the first president of the nation, Iskandar Mirza, declaring martial law. Due to tensions, East Pakistan became Bangladesh in 1971. And during the same time period, Pakistan held its first democratic elections. However, they didn't work out as desired. And Pakistan has experienced a turbulent political history marked by alternating periods of civilian and military rule, with several military coups and challenges to democracy. The nation was directly linked to the war on terror, and then President Pervez Musharraf sided with the US over Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, and allowed the use of 3 bases within Pakistan for military operations. However, the nation has been criticized for selectively targeting terrorist groups while allegedly harboring or tolerating others that serves its interest. In the last decade, Pakistan's Democracy Index ranking has plunged. As just a couple of years ago, it was in the 4s, making it then a hybrid regime. The 2024 general elections were marred by allegations of military interference, suppression of opposition parties, and restrictions on media freedom. In October 2024, the government passed the 26th Constitutional Amendment, altering the process for appointing the Chief Justice and limiting judicial independence, a move criticized by legal experts and international observers. Additionally, new legislation granting the government extensive powers to control social media content has raised concerns about freedom of expression. These developments reflect a troubling erosion of democratic institutions and norms in Pakistan. Uzbekistan, a developing country of 37 million people, is physically double landlocked, and this unique geographic trait shaped its history. Currently, it has a Democracy Index score of 2.1. However, unlike the other stand nations, Uzbekistan has seen improvements in the last 2 decades, as its prior rankings before 2017 was below 2. The nation has taken cautious steps towards reform in recent years, especially under President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, who took office in 2016 after the death of longtime autocrat Islam Karimov. The country has relaxed some restrictions on the media, improved regional diplomacy, and opened its economy to more foreign investment. However, despite these changes, Uzbekistan remains an authoritarian state at its core. Political opposition is virtually non-existent, freedom of speech is tightly controlled, and the government continues to monitor and suppress dissent. Elections are held, but they usually lack competition, and power remains concentrated at the top. While there's hope for gradual progress, Uzbekistan's reforms have yet to transform the country into a truly democratic society. Tajikistan, a very mountainous and rugged nation, is home to nearly 11 million people, and the Tajiks, representing 86% of the population, are Persian speakers. The only country of the stand nations where this is evident. The nation has a Democracy Index rating of 1.83, which has been consistently below 2 since 2015. President Emomali Rahmon, a former communist official during the days of the Soviet Union, became the head of state during the height of the Tajik Civil War, and he was elected as president in 1994. While the country holds elections, they are not free or fair, with opposition parties either banned or severely restricted. Rahmon has consolidated power over the decades, elevating his family members to key government positions and cultivating a cult of personality. Freedom of speech is limited, media is tightly controlled, and dissent is often met with intimidation or imprisonment. Overall, the situation inside Tajikistan is bleak, and the nation shows no sign of becoming a full democracy. Turkmenistan, the smallest of the Stan nations in population with just over 7 million people, is extremely autocratic, with a democracy index ranking of 1.66, and unlike the other neighboring nations, the score has been consistent over the last 2 decades. The nation has lots of natural resources and has the 4th highest reserves of natural gas, so this allows the nation to have a GDP of $126 billion and a per capita income of nearly $20,000 a year. But much of its wealth is spent on vanity projects under its former dictatorial leader, President Gurbanguly, and now his son, President Serdar. These projects are mostly built in Ashgabat, the capital and largest city, and feature massive white marble government buildings, golden statues, empty boulevards, and opulent public spaces to promote a carefully crafted image of national greatness. But in Turkmenistan, the government controls the media, bans political opposition, censors the internet, and surveils its citizens. Elections are held, but they're rigged with pre-selected candidates and no real competition. Much of the population lives in poverty, and the quality of healthcare, education, and basic goods remains limited. Turkmenistan will likely remain highly autocratic for the foreseeable future. In the crossroads of Central and South Asia, Afghanistan is an extremely impoverished nation of 40 million people, and as of 2024, it has a democracy index ranking of 0.25, the lowest of any nation, even lower than recluse North Korea. The nation wasn't always like this, as before the 1970s, it was becoming a secular Western-aligned nation. But there was always a divide between the more progressive urbanized centers and the more conservative rural traditional communities, some associated with Islamist extremism. In 1978, a communist government was formed, which aligned itself with the Soviet Union. The government redistributed land, secularized education, and increased women's rights. But these changes clashed with deeply rooted traditional and religious values, especially in rural areas. In 1992, after the collapse of the communist government, the Afghan Civil War began and lasted until 1996, which resulted in the Taliban taking control of Kabul and most of Afghanistan, and them establishing the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Under this authoritarian fundamentalist regime, the quality of life for Afghans plummeted, and the Taliban imposed a rigid theocratic regime grounded in an extreme interpretation of Islamic law, reversing decades of social liberalization. After the US-led invasion in 2001 toppled the Taliban, Afghanistan tried to build a democratic state, but it remained unstable and plagued by corruption, insurgency, and poverty. In 2021, following the withdrawal of US forces, the Taliban swiftly regained control of the country, effectively underdoing 20 years of Western state-building efforts. Today, Afghanistan remains under a de facto theocratic regime, with severe restrictions on women's rights, freedom of expression, and civil liberties. The country faces a dire humanitarian crisis, international isolation, and profound economic challenges. There is very little hope that Afghanistan will ever become a stable democracy, especially as long as the Taliban is in power. The unique and distinctive geography of Central Asia is why the Stan nations are the way they are. So, is there a chance that one or all of them will eventually become stable democracies? Maybe one, or a few, but certainly not all. Kazakhstan probably has the best chance of achieving this, due to factors such as it being the most stable economically. But while economic stability can bring democracy to nations, it doesn't always. Take a look at the Middle East nations, such as Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE. They're all considered high-income nations, and all of them are ranked as autocratic on the democracy index, because they're all considered Islamic theocratic states. But Kazakhstan, while majority Muslim, is a secular nation. That trait may allow the nation to slowly but surely achieve democratic status. By this whole region being at the confluence of empires, former communist regimes, and extremist Islamic groups, it's sort of hard to create stable democracies. 5 of the 7 stand nations were part of the Soviet Union until 1991, and were part of the Russian Empire before that. This influence has greatly been implanted in these nations' histories, and thus political systems, so it can be very difficult to change that. In addition, there may be a chance that Russia will exert influence once again over the stand nations, similarly to what it's trying to do with Ukraine. There are so many twists and turns that may happen, and only time will tell if the stand nations will stray away from their autocratic governments. What do you think the future of geopolitics is for the stand nations? I'd love to hear your opinion, so please leave your feedback in the comment section below. That concludes this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you like learning about the world, you found the right channel. So be sure to subscribe to my channel, Urban to Earth, to view more videos. Until next time!